In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? This incident happened to my good friend last week. My friend, S, is the owner of a cat who for the past 5 years have now meowed at all. One night, at around 3 a.m., her mother woke up to the sound of meowing and the cat trying to enter A's room. Her mother opens the door and sees A lying on her bed, eyes wide open but still asleep. She tries to close her eyes but to no avail. So she recites some prayer and finally got her eyes closed. The cat then stops meowing and resumes catting around the house. The next day at work, she's a teacher BTW. Her colleague tells her that last night, while she and her son was going to bed, something weird happened. Bed. From the layout of their room, they could see the mirror inside their toilet from the bed. Right before switching the lights out, her son asks Mom, "Why is Teacher Ray inside our bathroom?" Nothing else really happened since then, but it freaked me out. On the intro camp of my university, me and 2 friends decided to go out in the woods, because they had seen a beautiful glade there. Because we wanted to see it in the moonlight, we went there at night. It was quite beautiful, but there was a building there that we hadn't seen before. It was a small cubic building with no door and no windows. We thought it was a little creepy but thought nothing of it. When we walked back to the main camp, we got lost and stumbled upon an old gate. We couldn't see a thing, and suddenly there was an old creepy gate in front of us. When we walked through it, we saw all kinds of little blocks like the little building we saw before. We decided to get the fuck out back to camp. We googled it when we got back and turns out it was an old camp for military people who got PTSD. It got destroyed by a fire and they kinda just left the remains there. That was probably one of the most unsettling things I have seen. I was on a scout camping trip when I was like 11. Another scout in the tent tried to wake me up to ask if he could use my flashlight. I popped up out of my sleeping bag and looked in his direction and whispered, "I gave you your life back. Isn't that enough? I gave you your life back." I heard about it the next day. During the summer of 2013, I studied abroad in Rome. My class and I took a trip to Tuscany 1 week, exploring small towns, and one night slept in an old monastery with blocked-off staircases that go up to darkness, a cabin-like breeze, long hallways and extravagant dining room tables. A fine balance of cozy and classically creepy. Before bed, my class and I, already pretty creeped out from staying in this place, were telling scary stories from our childhood, not dissimilar from this subreddit. So that night when my roommate and I went to bed, we were already pretty jumpy. I was also having some trouble sleeping here, and couldn't text my GF given the virtually zero service. About an hour passes, and just as I'm noticing my thoughts jumble into the first stages of sleep, I hear my roommate start to mumble a bit, which startled me, but I shook it off as him having a bad dream. But his mumbling then began to morph into sleep talking. I couldn't make out the words and thought he was still just mumbling nonsense. I then realized he was sleep talking in a different language. I immediately start screaming at him to wake up, and when he doesn't stop and instead just looks over at me and continues to word vomit, I am fully convinced he is possessed by a demon and is talking in Latin. I run over to his bed and continue to yell at him, and he just lays there, grinning at me and speaking in Latin. Eventually, as our other friends come over, he wakes up pale and confused, with no recollection of what happened. He's Indian, so in hindsight it was likely that he was just speaking Indian. I just wasn't aware he was fluent at the time. However, he claims he's never slept talked in his life and didn't sleep talk again the rest of our time abroad. Waking up in the middle of the night to go pee and see my daughter sitting up in her crib looking straight past you. For me, there's one of many stories. Having grown up with a medium as a mother, possessions were a normal thing. The most unsettling thing to me was a night when I was laying in bed next to my aunt, had to have been in her 20s, she was in bed next to mine. Shadow person enters room and walks towards her bed, she sees it and starts freaking out, screaming, and puts covers over her face all the while. Me, a kid, is laying on his side in bed witnessing all this a few feet away. My parents ran in the room and it disappeared, and to this day no one speaks about it or has any explanation. I could have chalked it up to the many other imaginary visits I had from these beings to date, but this one is corroborated. Paranormal experience for me. I grew up in a house that was built about 215 years ago. My bedroom was formerly a maid's room in the servants' quarters of the house. I later found out this male was regularly beaten and raped by the owner of the house. I would wake in the middle of the night with a panicky feeling that someone was watching me. The maid, never looking at me, was usually right outside my door, or in my room looking out the window. I never saw her face and she never attempted to communicate with me, nor I with her. I am religious and deeply respectful but very afraid of the paranormal. Thinking back, I've often wondered if she was in a sense protecting me from her master, or if she was simply tormented and wandering, as occasionally I would see her in other places in the house. Often I would not move an inch if I saw her, and I would begin to pray out loud. She always left me when I prayed, though I'm honestly not sure if she dissolved or just wandered onto a new place in the house. No one else in my family claims to have seen her, but no one has questioned my experience either. My room was also located near the attic of the house where my dad once found a very old suicide note, and we are not sure to whom it belonged. Anyway, it was scary and fascinating as hell, and to this day, even in a home 115 years younger, I am scared to encounter a paranormal presence, even if it didn't seem like she wanted to harm me back then. If you've never seen a ghost/demon/spirit, she was solid, and she appeared to look like a very dusty being, as in very grayed out tones of colors. Sometimes she appeared almost white. My first experience with a death rattle. Guy had been declared dead 20-ish minutes prior. Next thing I know, I am grabbing for the guy's feet to put it in the body bag, and guy looked back and said, "WTF did you just say?" I'm always too late to these thread, but here goes. Back in high school, I was driving home from a friend's house who lived about 20 miles away in a neighboring town. We lived in a really rural forested area. There was a shortcut that my friends and I would often take to avoid traveling through the center of town, which saved a bit of time and was the route of choice of getting a little baked face. Being one of those nights, I opted for the shortcut, which was a fairly long, winding dirt road that passed around the perimeter of a large pond. This was a no street lights, no houses, through the middle of the forest, room for one car at a time sort of road. Though we had always joked about how freaked out we were driving it at night, usually expecting pond monsters or a Sasquatch party, we had never actually seen anything scary. This particular night, it was around 1 a.m., and I was already succumbing to my heightened paranoia and decided to drive a little faster to get it over with. I rounded one of the corners and slammed on the brakes. About 100 feet ahead of me was what looked like an old woman wearing a shawl and a long coat, her back to me, walking slowly, slouched over and carrying 2 black trash bags. Despite my sudden stop and most likely audible high-pitched scream, the women didn't turn or acknowledge me in any way. After catching my breath and realizing I shouldn't shit myself in my parents' car, I decided to man up a little and ensure she was okay. I drove up to her and rolled the windows down, and asked if she needed any help. She just continued to walk, head down, acting like I wasn't there. I asked if she needed a ride, and she kept walking. One last chance as yelling "MAAM, are you okay?" with no response, and I decided it was time to freak out. Thinking about what could be in the bags, the fact that I was a mile or two from the nearest house in the middle of the woods, that I didn't even see her face, it was pitch black, she wasn't responding, and I was pretty stoned was too much. I jetted home, and forced myself to sleep. In the morning I told my parents, and was met with some heavy eye rolling, both dismissing it as nothing. I still think about what her deal was, what was in the bags, and who she was. This isn't nearly as good as a lot of these, but when I was about 11/12, I had a friend that I basically lived with over the summer. His dad was the cool dad that let us curse and stay up all night, you know, shit that makes a parent seem cool when you're an idiot 12-year-old. His dad also was always up all night, because drugs, but we didn't realize that until much later. Anyway, it was probably 2 to 3 in the morning one night and we were up in my friend's room on our computers like we always were, when his dad ran into the room completely excited and yelling, "Guys, get in the truck, I have to show you something." We are instantly intrigued and hop in his truck. Our neighborhood was large, pretty nice and also secluded from the city. Towards the edge of one end there were farms/fields with one lone road that drove along the fences on one side, with a wooded area on the other side. He pulls down said road and is driving kinda slow, looking back and forth on both sides of the road, when all of a sudden he was like, "There. Look." We look in the direction he's pointing and there's an old woman, dressed in full-on Little Bo Peep attire, cane, excessive headgear and all, in the road just smiling all creepy and waving at us. As we passed her she kind of started to try to make her way towards the truck, which made us all flip out, and his dad sped off. It sounds kinda dumb, but in the moment it was super strange and creepy as hell. His dad mentioned he had seen her before, but it had been many, many years since the last time. I imagine it was some senile old lady who may have slipped out unbeknownst to her caretakers. Either way, she successfully scared the crap out of some 12-year-old kids.